Imagine waking up in a place you've never seen before. Walls covered in a sickly yellow hue, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights ringing in your ears, and the overwhelming stench of damp carpet. That's how it started for Ryan, a 26-year-old delivery driver who thought he had just taken a wrong turn down a hallway. Ryan found himself disoriented, his mind racing to make sense of the endless maze of identical rooms. The walls stretched endlessly, each corner leading to more of the same. Yellow wallpaper, flickering lights, and an eerie silence that seemed to grow louder with each step. But it wasn't just the unsettling environment that made his chest tighten. There was something else. Faint at first, but unmistakable. The sound of distant, deliberate footsteps echoing through the empty halls. First signs of something wrong. Ryan's breathing quickened as he tried to steady himself. "Stay calm," he muttered under his breath. But calm was a luxury he couldn't afford. Each step he took felt heavier, like the air itself was trying to hold him back. The buzzing lights above flickered erratically, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. Then he saw it. A handprint smeared on the yellow wallpaper. It was faint, almost unnoticeable, but it was there, fresh. As Ryan pressed forward, the sound of footsteps grew louder, no longer distant but unnervingly close. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. There was no response, just the faint echo of his own voice. And then something moved in the corner of his vision. A shadow darted past an open doorway, too fast to be human. Ryan's instinct screamed at him to run, but where? Every hallway looked the same. Panic began to take over as he realized the horrifying truth. He wasn't alone. The presence revealed. Ryan turned the corner, his pulse racing, and stopped dead in his tracks. In the dim, flickering light, he saw it. At first it looked like just another shadow, but then it moved. Jerky, unnatural movements, as if it didn't belong in this world. The figure stood tall, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It didn't have a face, or maybe it did, but Ryan couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. The buzzing sound from the lights grew louder, almost deafening, as the creature began to move toward him. Its steps were slow, deliberate, and yet it covered the distance between them unnervingly fast. Ryan stumbled backward, his breath coming in short gasps. He turned and ran, the sound of his shoes slapping against the damp carpet drowned out only by the creature's distorted, guttural noises. Every turn led him to the same endless maze of yellow walls and flickering lights. It was as if the rooms themselves were conspiring against him, twisting and reshaping to keep him trapped. His mind raced for an escape plan, but the truth was sinking in. There might not be a way out. Then, in a moment of sheer terror, Ryan made a mistake. He glanced back. A fatal mistake. When Ryan looked back, he wished he hadn't. The creature was closer than he expected, its elongated limbs bending and twisting unnaturally as it crawled toward him with alarming speed. Its blank, featureless face seemed to ripple, as if something beneath the surface was trying to break free. A low, distorted screech filled the air, resonating in Ryan's ears and shaking him to his core. He turned his head forward and sprinted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't know how long he'd been running. Minutes, hours, days. Time felt warped in this place, as though it had no meaning. His legs burned and his lungs screamed for air, but the footsteps behind him never faltered. Then he saw it. A door. It was different from the rest of the endless maze, a heavy metal door with no handle. It stood alone at the end of a hallway, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. Desperation overcame him as he lunged toward it, slamming his fists against the cold steel. "Let me out!" he screamed, tears streaming down his face. Behind him, the screeching grew louder. He could feel the presence closing in, its icy breath brushing against the back of his neck. Ryan turned to face the creature, his back pressed against the door. For a brief moment, the flickering light illuminated its face, or what was left of it, and then everything went black. The truth unveiled. Ryan's consciousness flickered like the broken lights above him. He wasn't sure if he had blacked out for seconds or hours, but when his eyes fluttered open, he realized he was no longer leaning against the door. He was lying on the damp carpet, the same sickly yellow walls surrounding him. The metal door was gone. His body ached as he sat up, his mind reeling. "Was it real?" he whispered, his voice trembling. But then he noticed something, a deep gash on his arm, fresh and bleeding. It wasn't a dream. Ryan forced himself to his feet, his legs wobbling beneath him. The buzzing noise was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on him like a weight. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the writing on the wall, written in what looked like smudged, rusty red letters. "You're not supposed to be here." His heart sank. The air felt colder, heavier. Before he could process the message, a sound broke the silence. A faint hum, mechanical and rhythmic. It grew louder and louder until it became unbearable. Ryan turned toward the source and saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures, identical to the creature that had chased him earlier, standing motionless in the hallway. Their heads twitched in unison, their bodies jerking forward one step at a time. Panic overtook him as he backed away, but his retreat was cut short by a voice, calm, monotone, and echoing in his head. "Welcome to Level 1. You have been assimilated." The walls around him began to shift, twisting into new configurations. The hallway stretched endlessly once again. Ryan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. The figures advanced, and as they surrounded him, the last thing he saw was the sickly yellow walls folding in on themselves, sealing him into the infinite labyrinth of the backrooms. The endless descent. "It was supposed to be a shortcut," Claire muttered as she peered down the dimly lit staircase. The elevator was out of service, and her apartment was only 2 floors down. It seemed easy enough, just take the stairs. But as she descended, something felt wrong. The walls were bare concrete, the kind you'd find in an old run-down building. The air was heavy, stale, and carried a faint metallic tang that made her stomach churn. After the first 10 steps, Claire paused, glancing behind her. She could still see the doorway to the floor above, but it felt distant, like it had stretched farther away than it should have. Shaking off the unease, she continued downward, 30 steps, 40, 50. Her brow furrowed as she glanced at her phone. No signal. She should have reached her floor by now, but all she found was more stairs and the same flickering light overhead. The descent felt endless. Claire stopped again, gripping the cold, rusted handrail. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. Her voice echoed faintly, distorted as if the walls were mocking her. Then she heard it, a faint sound from below, a scraping, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It was coming closer. The presence below. Claire's heart pounded as the scraping sound grew louder, each drag slow and deliberate. She gripped the railing tighter, her palms slick with sweat. "Hello?" she called out, her voice quivering. No answer, just the steady, grating noise echoing from below. She hesitated, torn between going back up or continuing downward. Turning back seemed impossible. The doorway above now looked impossibly far, like it had receded into the shadows. With no other choice, she forced herself to descend further, each step feeling heavier, as if the stairs were pulling her in. The light above her flickered and went out for a moment, plunging the staircase into darkness. When it came back on, she froze. On the landing just below her, something was waiting. It was hunched over, its back to her, its long, bony arms dragging a large, unidentifiable object wrapped in tattered cloth. The scraping noise came to an abrupt stop. Claire's breath hitched, and her legs refused to move. She wanted to scream, to run, but fear had rooted her in place. Then, slowly, the thing began to turn its head toward her. Its face, or what was left of it, was a horrifying blend of exposed muscle and featureless skin, as if it had been stitched together from parts that didn't belong. It didn't speak, it didn't make a sound, but Claire felt it watching her, its hollow, unblinking eyes burning into her soul. No way out. Claire's chest tightened as the creature's head tilted unnaturally, its neck cracking with each movement. The silence was suffocating, broken only by her own shallow breaths. Then, without warning, it started to move, slowly at first, dragging itself up the stairs toward her, its bony limbs creaking with every step. Panic surged through her body and she turned to run. She scrambled up the stairs, her legs burning with every step, but no matter how far she climbed, the doorway above never got closer. It was as if the staircase stretched infinitely, trapping her in its cruel loop. Behind her, the sound of the creature's dragging limbs grew louder, faster, "Please, no!" she cried out, tears streaming down her face, but her voice echoed into the void, swallowed by the oppressive concrete walls. Just as she thought she couldn't go any further, the lights flickered again and went out completely. The darkness was absolute. Claire froze, her hands gripping the railing, her mind racing. She could feel it now, the creature's presence impossibly close. The air around her grew colder, its icy breath brushing against her neck. A raspy, guttural whisper echoed in her ears. "You should never have come here." Suddenly the lights flickered back on, but Claire wasn't on the stairs anymore. She was standing in her apartment building's lobby, her back against the cold metal doors of the elevator. The hallway was silent, empty, as if nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, showing the time. Only 5 minutes had passed. She stumbled forward, her legs trembling, and reached for the front door. But as she stepped outside, she froze. Across the street, through the reflection in the glass, she saw it. The staircase. It was still there, endless and waiting, the faint scraping sound echoing from its depths.